Oh, sailor, have you found your perfect sea? This evening I want to talk about truth and its aspects. And the key takeaway point I want to make is that truth is one, but the aspects are pretty well infinite. And when we generally seek the truth of something, we're asking after its importance, because if it's something merely incidental, we don't normally say, is that true? So if someone, in a court for example, where were you at 6:17, the moment the murder, I keep using this murder analogy, you know, the one with the dog digging up the bone, but where were you at 6:17 on the night of X when Z got knifed? And that's a very specific question requiring a very specific answer, and it is, your life depends on you being able to answer that truthfully if you're in the witness stand. What will happen in your life? So you can see it's not, we don't really require making a problem of the truth of something unless we are speaking about important things. And yet, of course, in the incidentals of day-to-day life, we are assuming that the information that we have, that the bus will arrive then, that the address you've given me is this one, that the phone number that you've given me is the right one. We're assuming that that information we can act upon, which is one aspect of truth. It's the information that we can rely upon to take action. And as I said, if it's incidental, if it's just a small matter, it's not going to matter that much if someone says they're coming at 3 o'clock and they don't get there till 7 o'clock. It might irritate you, but it's not really that important. So the truth of that is not such a big issue. But in the main, when we speak of truth, it's because we're making an inquiry. Now, in an earlier lecture, I had made the point that the dyad of truth being either absolute or relative is a very unhelpful one. And this lecture, in a way, is a way of clarifying that, because every person who goes to university to a first year philosophy class will very quickly end up in a discussion which is really a metaphysical discussion about not only the nature of truth, but its status. And the status of truth being, is it absolute or is it relative? And if it's absolute, that means there is one truth. If it's relative, then people have their different truths. In fact, various disciplines, I can't remember if I said this in that earlier lecture, but various disciplines within the university tend to gravitate to one side of that dyad, over this or that. So analytic philosophers, in the main, are really on the side of truth being something absolute. One of the reasons they're on that side is because, again, in the main, there are exceptions to this. A guy called Harman, for example, not the great Harman of the 18th century, but the very minor Harman of the 20th century, and possibly still alive in the 21st century, made all these arguments for relativism, which you can take or leave. I don't think they're very good or important, but anyway, that was he was part of the analytic tradition, or is part of the analytic tradition if he's still alive, I can't remember. But the thing is, in the main, the reason why people like Harman and the relativist position has not been widely embraced by the analytic philosophers is because they tend to see philosophy as something akin to science, and they think that scientific inquiry yields true answers that we can rely upon as being true. And if they weren't true, then the things that we hope to achieve through science, and let's just take engineering or biology or any one of the sciences, that they wouldn't really be working. It'd all be haphazard. And we'd be back in a kind of pre-scientific, magical kind of thinking age. And so for the analytical philosophers, that is a kind of horror show, and the way they generally think is that we have some stabilities that we can rely upon because There is a truth. And they believe that they have a way of accessing what the truth is. That's all well and good, and if we were talking about scientific inquiries into nature, I would not want to dispute at all that there are certain truths. The problem, though, is that lots of the inquiries we make aren't really like our inquiries into nature, but they're every bit as important to us, and we want to rely upon the information that we have. We want to be able to get good information. But, so that is, we are seeking a truth, say a historical truth, for example. But then that starts to get very murky. And here's where we get to the essential thing that I'm getting at. It very much depends upon the question you're pitching and how you pitch it and how you focus upon it and what yield you take or what you're able to gather to access via those questions and the methods you deploy to get answers to those questions. That is going to make a difference to the truth of what you're talking about. But very often we pitch questions in a very broad way. So we'll say, what is the cause of the French Revolution? What is the cause of the Russian Revolution? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? And if you read much history, you realise, well, there's just many, many answers to that. And historians don't agree about the answers. So someone will hypothesise, suggest that this is why it occurred, and another one will come along and say, well, that's not really that important in the scheme of things, and then they will give you an argument. So we start to see there's a kind of argument that's occurring. Now, I just want to take it back to that before I lose that point about relativism and absolutism. I said that within the disciplines within universities, we see there's a difference. So the analytic philosophers, and I would say generally, any of the departments that are natural science-like are ones that require a kind of rock-hard foundation of truth, an absolute, if you like, a way of accessing information which is absolutely rock-solid. Though, even with the sciences, there have been, I'm not saying I'm a great fan of his, but thinkers way back in the 1970s, like Paul Feyerabend, who for a brief while was quite a celebrity, have really called into question whether it is rock solid. But let's just say that those disciplines tend to go that way. Other disciplines, and the ones that spring most readily to mind, are the disciplines of anthropology and literature, and to some extent sociology. In fact, sociology, especially when you hear the phrase social construction, knowledge of social construction, that would suggest that depending on the society that you have, the constructions that you make, that is the way in which truth circulates. So anthropology definitely tends to be a very anti-metaphysical or anti-absolutist discipline, though insofar as I have seen sociologists and the group that are and anthropologists, literary studies people, and the group that mainly get accused of doing this are the post-structuralists or the postmodernists. They're not quite the same thing, and they're often conflated, but they're near enough to be close enough. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein talked about things being family resemblances rather than essences. And it's definitely true that the postmodernists and the post-structuralists are kind of members of a common family. In fact, they tended to live around the same time, go to the same bars and restaurants, have the same conversations, argue with each other, but the assumptions they shared, I think I've probably said this elsewhere, have a lot in common. So they tend to be squabbling, if you like family members, squabbling about certain things, but what conjoins them, what bonds them, is far greater than what divides them. I don't want to go too far into that, and I don't. And my point here is that in the main, it's unfortunate that they are trotted out as examples of relativism, because in the main, any insights they have, and I don't want to deny that some of them have some insights about some things, they tend to be sociological in character and can be useful, provided, and here's a big thing, if you've listened to any of the other lectures I've given, you know that I don't think very much of emancipation as being an objective of the philosophical imagination or mind. I think it's flabby and loose and useless, and it can absolutely conceal its opposite behind it, which I recall one of the doyens of that school, Jacques Lacan, in 1968. Again, I may have said this, but please forgive me if I have. When the revolts were happening in Paris in 1968, and they all loved Jacques Lacan, he said to them, the problem is you want a master and you will find them. And I think along very similar lines to Lacan on that particular point. I think very often the embracing of the absolute in terms of emancipation leads to the complete negation of minor freedoms. Anyway, that's another issue. But coming back to this point is that those particular thinkers, and I would say this is pretty true of the anthropologists, it's a pity that they get caught up in metaphysical questions. And again, as you know from these lectures, I tend to consider myself an anti-metaphysician, though there are one or two metaphysicians I quite like. I think metaphysical questions can be fun. They can open up the imagination. But in terms of what I think philosophy is best for, and why I give these lectures, is I am looking for ways, and I've been doing this my whole life, to be more observant about the world and our place within it, the meanings we bestow on things, and why we bestow those things, and how they play them out, and what happens to us by adopting those meanings. So I'm interested in following what happens with the spirit, the human spirit, the world, what we make of it, and what we make of each other, by what and how we think. And I do think there are better and worse ways. But those better and worse, so that instantly, if I say there's better and worse ways, indicates to me that I think what is normally grouped under the umbrella of relativism is simply not very helpful. It's basically too general. It's a way of fluffing the important issues by leading us off into the clouds. And again, as I hope that's been evident in these talks, that is precisely that I think that we tend to do, that beguiles us, that fills us with self-importance, pride, idiocy, very closely related in my opinion, and you won't find any of it in more stockpiled in any other place of such a degree as you do find in a university and in university libraries, unfortunately. If we want to get something from those disciplines which emphasize the fluidity, if you like, the flexibility, the diversity, the differences that are accentuated and developed by human interaction, which is exactly what anthropology, the different values that motivate action, the different ways of doing things of different peoples and different societies or different classes, we can find a range of disciplines which do accentuate that, and provided they're not beholden to one overarching questionable principle such as emancipation, they can be very helpful. They start to distort when, in fact, they do exactly the opposite of what they're pretending they're not doing, and that is they introduce an absolute as if it's true and just proceed on their merry way, and everything gets smothered or squeezed in to that absolute. And that is the danger of absolutizing principles as such. Now, is truth a principle as such, or is truth something that illumines, that enables us to move outside of any particular principle so that we may consider its validity or deployment its limits, its value? Or is it that truth is actually ensconced within a principle itself? And all we need to do then is articulate what is the principle that truth is. Having said that, of course, if, as I'm going to do, we have some kind of more open-ended understanding of what truth is, it could be argued, but haven't you just given that an absolutist, a solidity, a way of ensuring that, it doesn't breathe? And my response to that is, no, I don't believe that is true at all. Now, this suggests that I am going to come up with a pretty pragmatic notion of truth. And to some extent that's true, except I would say if I look at philosophical pragmatists, I do have a certain strong appreciation for someone like Charles Peirce, though even with Peirce, I would say the one problem I have, I don't know if any of you become familiar with Charles Sanders Peirce, who was a 19th century polymath and genius and great logician. My problem with Peirce's philosophy, in a nutshell, is that he solidifies the disposition that is appropriate for scientific inquiry, and I think that is a problem. On the other hand, I'm not that fond of John Dewey. I'm not that fond of Richard Rorty and various other pragmatists. William James, maybe not, but so I don't consider myself a pragmatist. And what I do consider myself, and let's get back to this: is it absolute? Is it rock solid? Is someone that follows the question. That it's within the development of questions that truth yields what it may yield. In fact, I've said this in an earlier lecture too, I see the truth about our doings is revealed through time and over time and gradually, though sometimes it can be instantly, sometimes it can be a shock, it can be shock and awe. And you might be able to imagine instances where something has been distressing you. Someone's keeping a secret, for example, and you want to know the truth about why they're acting in a certain way, an affair, for example, or something happening at work, in the workplace, and you want to know the truth that really matters to you. And when you discover it, that is the truth. That's all you need to know for that particular aspect. And this is going to be the key word I want to make. The aspect of what it is that you're searching for and what it is in it of itself, but as an aspect. And that is the thing with our lives. Our lives are full of various features, various aspects, various meanderings and questions and information. And we, a philosopher, may want there to be this great coherence. Truth is absolute. But there may not be that coherence. The coherence may be the bits and pieces that we make of our lives with the aspects of truth, or the truths that have yielded themselves to us that we choose to act upon. Because we can know the truth about something and not act with it. We may choose to ignore it. That's one of the things that we can do. We don't have to live in or act in truth, and very often, major part of our lives, we can avoid that. Someone, though, who believes something and is prepared to die for it, to go to prison, because they strongly believe something to be so important for their life, for the meaning of their life, whether it's the martyrs or the martyrs of faith, but there's many ways in which faith can happen. It may be a political faith, it may be a religious faith, it may be some just faith in what it is that one is, who one is, one's faith in one's image of oneself, of what it is one wants to do with one's life. There's many ways it can affect us, but one may then choose to live in truth, or one may never want to go there. One may not want to know too much about things. One may be very happy, in a sense, avoiding too much knowledge. Anyone familiar with the story of Oedipus will recall that the whole play of Sophocles is about someone who relentlessly inquires into the truth, only to find that the truth is so horrific. It destroys him. And it's a truth that he did not, it's the truth about what he did and the circumstances in which he did it, and which he was ignorant of, completely ignorant of the fact that he had killed his own father. Completely ignorant of the fact that the man he had killed was his own father, that he had married his own mother, completely ignorant of that. And it's a fantastic play because you've got the chorus warning him not to look too far into truth. And then to take another Greek tragic playwright, Aeschylus at one point says, we suffer into truth. And there's a great wisdom in that, because that is also suggesting that truth is born of suffering, and that without suffering we may not know truth. This, by the way, I think is to some extent and another extent, and in some ways the Jewish, Christian and Greek traditions, there's a certain overlap, because I think because of the primordial nature of the insights they have about, and uncluttered insights about being human. And the biblical example is if you will die if you eat of the fruit of knowledge. That to know, to actually ingest knowledge, is also to be on a path of suffering. You will suffer into knowledge, and in a sense it's only through the experience of death that you will have knowledge. It's only through the experience of suffering that certain truths about life, its meaning, your place in it, the quality of your loves, the meaning of what you do, the reality of what you do, is tested. If the what you value is not tested, it doesn't really mean anything. It's kind of true, but not in a significant way. So here's another way we can look at another aspect of truth, is what something signifies to you or to a community, and the weight and moments of its significance. So that's another aspect, if you like. So what I'm getting at is that as we move through a life, as we make a life, as we build a world around us, as we start to see what it is we're doing, because again, another problem I have with so much philosophy is it just puts too much weight upon consciousness. And I'm not talking about, let's go to a Freudian or Jungian view of the unconscious. In some ways, I think that's just another trick in order to get us to know more about consciousness. It may yield some valid stuff, but so much of what we do, we won't ever know on the surface until a particular yield point, if you like, until it takes a significance on us, and then we go, oh, all of that was mattering, and I didn't even know it mattered. I did not, they know not what they do. Again, a biblical phrase. And the reason again, as I said, I use the Greeks and these biblical writers is because I think they've thought very deeply about what it is to experience life, where in our modern age we are so abstract, which is one reason why truth is relative and truth is absolute is trotted out in every first year philosophy course, and it's such a meaningless piece of gibberish, it's just such rubbish, is because we are so abstract. We surround ourselves with abstractions, and the abstractions that work for us, and this is one reason I think that the philosophers, especially in that analytic tradition, who certainly in Australia or Australasia, the United States, and even the United Kingdom for a long time at least, were occupying the departments of philosophy. I think they gravitated to this faith in science because of the kind of world that we live in. It's a world in which we see a certain kind of abstraction to have efficacy. But it's not the kind of efficacy or abstraction that really helps us with our lives. Now, I'm sure there are people who are studying psychology that may beg to differ with me, but I have to say my experience of psychologists is not so great. I don't really respect a lot of them. I don't think they know anything any more than anybody else, and I would actually look to literature, to writers of literature, not to literary departments anymore, because they don't do it, to look at what is motivating people, when it's motivating them, why it's motivating. Be looking at human character, which brings me right back to one of the first talks that I gave. So, when we wish to talk about truth as one and truth as many, what we're really seeking to inquire about, for me, is a way of not getting caught up, not being beholden to a set of abstractions which will only mislead us, which will only puff up our pride. See, for me, pride is the enemy, and lead us astray by thinking we know so much that certain questions should never be posed. A certain skeptical attitude should be shut down, or that we know enough that we can just absolutely trust it. And again, for certain things, that might be fine. But for the things of meaning, the things that most matter to us, not building a bridge, but why we may wish to cross that bridge, why we may wish to go to, what we may wish to do on the other side once we go there, the various projects and engagements that we partake of that have meaning for us. Once we start to explore those things, then we need to look into the various, not only the nature of truth, but the various aspects of truth. Now, I want to say something that I perhaps should have started off earlier with, and that it is very common amongst philosophers to divide truth in two fundamental ways. Now, I'm certainly not exhausting the way in which different philosophers want to zoom in to truth. But let me just say also that one of the things I'm absolutely not doing, and what I'm absolutely opposed to, is the idea that things that really matter to us can be accessed through such a fragile networking of concepts that if we position them a certain way and induct them a certain way, this is appropriate for the sciences, but it's absolutely inappropriate for the kinds of things and the kinds of truths I'm talking about. And that is, to me, I think that's a really dangerous and deranged way to do things, because then what we're really saying is we're just waiting for some philosopher to find the truth that we should all follow. That's not what I'm suggesting, because I am suggesting that all of us in our lives require a certain amount of attentiveness to what we're doing if we wish to do it better and avoid some pitfalls. We won't avoid all pitfalls, and so there's going to be a big question of what do we do after the pitfalls. Again, I think I did discuss that when I discussed the difference between the Greek philosophical tradition and the Christian tradition, is that the former tries to keep you out of the mess, the latter begins with the mess and the inevitability of that mess. And I side with that, that's original sin. Or, as opposed to the philosophers, the tragic view of the Greeks, I think, is also appropriate. So, philosophers generally, not all, but divide truth into two answers. There's two answers about the nature of truth, two primary answers. One is that truth is a correspondence with a set of facts, or a fact. So the accurate correspondence of what you think with what actually is the case. That's one view of truth. And for lots of things, that's exactly what you're looking for. Will I meet you at, let's meet at 3 o'clock. That information should be true, corresponding with 3 o'clock. I'm there, you're there, it worked out. Good. But then there's another answer to that, and probably the greatest exponent of this is Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, but you could say the entire idealist tradition is based upon this idea, and that is it's the coherence. That really it's the coherence of things, the systemic interrelationship of things. So, for example, if even taking the example I said, the time, tell me the time. The coherence theory of truth, people would say, well, yes, okay, but that's only an important question, an important piece of information, because all these other things that surrounding that, which have led you to require that. And a more coherent example, an answer to that, and there will be certain contexts where that coherence would be required, as for example what I started with, what were you doing on the night of such and such at 6:17, where you want that answer, but it's not the answer as such that is the most, let me say that again. The answer as such is really important because of all these other things that are important to that truth. So they are intrinsic, in a sense, to the truth that you will go and search. And that's a matter of coherence. So as you can see, both of them are kind of have something persuasive about them. And in spite of the fact that I often diss certain ideas of philosophers, in the main, philosophical positions exist because they disclose some aspect that is true, some feature of our being, of our existence, of our engagements. The appropriate question, and what makes a thoughtful person, an observant person, an attentive person, what they are, as opposed to an ideologue, and very often for me, philosophers are no better than ideologues, because they want to come in with and answer the same thing in every different, always move you to the same sets of questions, lead you into it's a this or that, or a certain looking at things a certain way, when I think that's not what's best for us. That's not what we want to do. That way we're not using our eyes, our ears, our feelings, our sentiments, all of which are very helpful in accessing information. One of my closest philosophical friends always sneers at the idea of intuitions and moral intuitions. And my response to that is, well, a moral intuition is not a nothing. It's actually something you have because of all the various voices that you've been exposed to throughout a life that are part of the tradition and the engagements that you've participated in, and they come out this way. You don't have that intuition because of an argument as such, but you have it because it has been observed by, held by people for various reasons. They're not the kind of reasons that have been reached through arguments, but most of our reasons in life aren't reasons because of a particular argument. They're reasons because of the pathways of life the courses of life, the endeavours that we've undertaken, which have disclosed aspects of life to us. I'll come back to that term, aspects. Anyone wanting to familiarise themselves with certain information. Here's a really important thing. One of the arguments against the idealist position and against the coherence position is that those that doing it will tend to supply bits of information out of their own inferences and abstractions. That is, they're going to come up with stuff which they think is true, which is not out there to be tested. And that is, I think that is that is kind of true. When I say kind of true, it's because I don't want to give too much to the fact. It's just a matter of facts and correspondence, because I think that is also going to miss something, and I'll get to that in a moment. But I do think the danger of philosophy, any philosophy generally, is what I call a priorism. And that is that you say things which you think are true because you've inferred their existence, you've inferred that they're true on the basis, Karl Marx is, to me, a paradigmatical example of that. He said, because capitalism is rubbish, it's terrible, it's oppressive of the working class, once the working class got into power, then the problems that are created by capitalism will be solved. And there's a lot of people still believe that. That is a priorism. He wouldn't have a clue. You would only know that once the working class were in power. And then you'd have to deal with the fact, well, how do you have any class of people completely acting on its interests and knowing what its interests are, who are totally agreed upon what they should do, or at least upon the procedures of how they should do it, and blah, blah, blah. And before you know it, it just made up all this rubbish. It's just nonsense. It's not that I'm so, capitalism's so great. Everything has its problems, and that's the point. You can only know them by looking at what they are. So, yes, a priorism is a problem. But, on the other hand, the idea that the world is a collection of items, and the younger Wittgenstein, that's exactly what he thought was the world, the world is the sum total of all the facts within it. That's just mad. And he came to realise it was just mad, because the world is not a great big storehouse of items. The world is our world because we are constantly in an engagement with it. We're constantly creating new things. We're constantly creating, we're in process with it. The world is in process. It is completely shifting. That's why all these people who think that they know the answer to what is going to be the solution to a social problem that everyone will be happy with are so stupid, because they don't see that over there, beyond their purview, something is happening that they've never considered. And in many ways it may be a reaction to their stewardship or rule or dogmas or ideology, and it's going to unsettle and create a turbulence which they just haven't thought about, because they don't see the turbulence that they themselves generate. We are all generating information. Actually, the economist Friedrich von Hayek, who on some things I'm really happy to be critical of him, but he was very good about information theory and why planned economies wouldn't work. And this is really applying here as well, because he basically said the problem with the planners is they think they have all the information, when it's the information is being generated on a moment-by-moment basis in our interactions, and in the case of a market, it's through us going up to someone, have you got this for that? I'll give you this for that. And no one can keep control of what will be produced through those engagements in the initiative that is unleashed by, for example, hey, have you got object X? And no one has thought about object X before, but you want object X because it's going to be able to do something for you. And so, no, but I know how I can make it for you. I can get it for you. I can make it. So the planning system, and it's actually, I'm talking about economics, but I'm not talking about economics. And this is another very important thing. In wanting to make us more observant, one of the things that will come out of this, about thinking about truth, is the way we compartmentalise our knowledge has to be treated with great caution. Because things aren't completely isolated and alone. We are driven by projects, by processes, by memories, by animosities, by friendships, by convivialities, all sorts of things motivating our behaviour, motivating our action, leading to generating new information, new stuff with consequences which we don't see when we generate them. All of this is part and parcel of the truth that we are making. And having access to that is often belated. This is, again, these are points I've made earlier, but they're it's very easy if you compartmentalise things to think, well, the question of truth, that's what philosophers do. And there's a theory of knowledge, or there's an ontology, there's a theory of being, or there's a metaphysics. You know, they can argue amongst themselves. I remember a philosophy lecturer whose lectures I attended when I was in Freiburg in the 1980s. He was a disciple of Martin Heidegger. In fact, he was one of the people that put together Heidegger's collected works. He was a terrible philosopher. He was just terrible. You know, really. Anyway, I remember him saying, he was giving us lectures on Immanuel Kant, right? And it was a very Heideggerian approach. And he said, now next semester, there's going to be a new philosopher here called Mr. Prouse, Herr Prouse. And when Prouse comes, he will tell you that Immanuel Kant was an epistemologist, that is, theory of knowledge was everything. He said, but I'm teaching Martin Heidegger. And Martin Heidegger knows that Immanuel Kant, it's all about ontology, it's theory, it's about being. And Heidegger is right. Of course, Mr. Prouse would come along. Both of their lectures, my God, they were just terrible. I ended up going to the library and working away with the neo-Kantians and reading Hegel and that, because I couldn't get anything useful from those guys. But anyway, so truth, that's over there. No. The reason truth is important and it's worth thinking about is because here you are now with your life, and you can either be a bit more thoughtful or more thoughtless. It's that simple. That's all there is to it. And going off to a university and learning a discipline may help, but every discipline, especially now in our compartmentalised, ideologically fractured and riven and driven age, comes with a whole other sets of problems. And unless you're observant enough to be able to think about the various aspects of what you are doing and what you're being taught. And, you know, one of the things I loved when I was a teacher at the university was occasionally finding students that felt so frustrated from what they were being taught by their teachers, because that was exactly what was disturbing them. These perturbances that they felt that something not true was happening, that they were basically being asked to believe something, or they could see problems with it, but they didn't know how to articulate it, or they couldn't articulate it in that environment. And that for me is exactly the kind of reason I think it's worth talking about truth in its unity and truth in its various aspects. And to come back to the aspect nature of it, that all of us can think of different aspects of our lives. I mentioned in another lecture as well that, or I think I mentioned it in one of the lectures, I'm sure I did, that although we live chronologically, our reflections are episodic. And when you say episodic, you're thinking of different aspects, different fragments, different bits and pieces, the bits that really matter to you at the moment that they're mattering. Something is disturbing you or disturbing you, your mind's whirling around trying to remember something because it's vital to something that you have to do now, or it's required for this moment, for the thing you're going to do. Or you've forgotten something and you've acted a certain way and you've realised the disastrous nature of that forgettingness, of it having remained concealed. Martin Heidegger talked about truth being aletheia, the Greek, and unconcealedness and unforgetting. That's quite nice. I mean, I have various problems with Heidegger, and I don't think you have to be a complete disciple of Heidegger to appreciate that particular aspect, but there's many aspects to it. And there are aspects of truth which, 2 + 2 is 4. Anyone who says, and this is what we get the relativist position becomes so inane. We get things like people saying, because because black people in the United States haven't fared as, I've used this example before, but haven't fared as well in mathematics. Therefore, mathematics is not really a science or a discipline. There's no real science we can, and of course that's just ridiculous. And it's ridiculous because it's actually harmful to people to be so thoughtless that they are not able to have access to ways of doing and being things in the world which might give them greater skills and opportunities. So if that's the case, then you're never going to have any black engineers, because you simply cannot do engineering without mathematics. Is that what you really want? But this is what happens when matters of truth become reduced to ideological claims and simplistic claims. Now, it is in fact the case that an understanding of truth that is strictly limited to what is appropriate for mathematical information or for learning the discipline of mathematics, and it is a discipline, and learning the rules involved and the different procedures that will enable you to do that is one thing, but that's not going to help you with everything. There's all sorts of things that's not really helpful. So this, of course, is why we do have disciplines. But the danger with disciplinarity is very often we need to move between things. Thus, for example, certain kinds of claims are made that are statistical. And if you don't work with someone or know information that is statistical verifiable, all sorts of claims that you might be making are not worth a cracker. And there's another aspect of this too, and this is a very frightening one in our time, is that because truths about certain things can be so complicated, it's very easy, and this is a crisis of our time, it's very easy for people who know jack shit about anything to say, now you must listen to these people because these people know the truth. They're the scientists. The scientists trust the science. You've heard this. This is appalling. And this is not a way in which you can have a more honest or truthful society for a start, because that immediately becomes a way of masking and protecting certain behaviours, certain elites, certain groups, channeling money to do certain kinds of research. It's just so full of corruption, and it's so easily validated by certain claims about truth, which simply are not true. Anyone who knows about the operations of science would know that science is constantly working between provisionals. And again, that doesn't mean everything on every occasion is, but there's a hell of a big difference. Let's take the vaccine. It's just going to get someone cancelled from YouTube, but me, who cares? No one's watching, but anyway, there's one or two watching. But certain claims about it, when in fact there's just not the time sufficiently taking to see all the consequences. That's not, anybody would know that things take time. We don't have enough information going in. This doesn't matter what it is we're talking about. When we're talking about new technologies or new components being put together for medical compound or chemical compounds, it's going to take time for us to see the complete consequences of it. It's going to take many studies and much attentiveness. And to pretend it's not, this is a disgrace. This is just shocking. And so what you then create is a very dishonest and easily manipulated society that I think is shocking, and I hate that. Now there's something else that comes back to relativism, which I think is very, very important. And when I think of the absolutist relativist stuff that, I used to be subject to at university, I remember when I first started university, how interesting I found it that and I can't say if this is still the case, but I have seen examples of this, when someone fresh out of school would want to insist upon the fact that they had their truth and that was the truth because they had it. And of course, if they went off to the philosophy classes, they'd soon drum that out of them. But in other courses, that would be kind of entertained, which is why I think the philosophers ended up hating the relativist sciences so much, because they could see it in these kids. And of course, that's just so stupid. Yes, okay, you've got the truth, little Johnny or Jenny or whatever you are. What's that even mean? What, you think it's true because it's true? I mean, what kind of things would that be It might be true that you like ice cream and therefore you like ice cream. But that's not going to help you very much if you want to lose weight or you want to know something about something else about it, what it does to your teeth or something like that. That's going to happen, so that's just stupid. But again, as is so often the case, is these kids who had been misled by their teachers, some of that stupidity that has gone into our culture, because we are I've said this before, we're a culture in which ideas really matter, so having really stupid ones really matters. It stupefies us. And look, no one can tell me that we are a more educated and wiser society than ever before. I just think that's ridiculous. We are infantile and stupid, and probably more stupid. And I think the average school teacher knows far less than the average school teacher even 50 or 60 years ago. No matter how bigoted they were or whatever, I don't care. I think just pound for pound in terms of knowing, we just leave it up to TVs and experts and to tell us what to do, and it's shocking. But what these kids and what relativists are kind of skirting around in a shockingly stupid way is something that is a fundamental feature of our humanity, and that is this: all of us are like one great bank of associations, a storehouse of all the information and associations that we've gathered and forgotten, that we've received second-hand, third-hand, whatever, or through first impression. The quality of those associations, of that information that goes in. An association is just bits of information you put together, right? And the information and the associations we make with that is all going to be very personal. And here I might just say, I strongly, strongly urge anyone who's interested in reading some philosophy to read a book called Personal Knowledge by Michael Polanyi. I think it's a very, very good book. And it's one that points to the fact that there is a personal element in all knowledge. And that comes through, in the book I wrote about philosophy, idolizing the idea, I pointed out amongst the analytic philosophers that for a crowd that is so strongly, generally, dedicated to truth being an absolute, it's interesting that they never agree with themselves. And not only that, they can't even agree about what are the most important questions they should be studying. They tend to... So if you go to a philosophy department, you'll say this one's doing epistemology, this one's doing aesthetics, this one's doing metaphysics, this one's doing ontology, this one's doing something, philosophy of science, this one's doing philosophy of mind, this one's doing philosophy of consciousness, blah, blah. And the thing, of course, is everyone is doing the philosophy they do because something about that appeals to them. There's some kind of emotional. That's not an intellectual thing. That's because we are all emotional. We have feelings about things, and their feelings gravitate them this way rather than that way. They also push them, pull them in the direction of the things that interest them. And here's my point about our associations, the inferences we make with those, the information we have. The association. Now, we have good information, we have bad information. But the associations we make are intrinsic to who we are, which is why people so strongly identify with what they believe. And that's often a disaster, because they shouldn't. They're much better off if they can step back from themselves and go, hang on a minute, let's just look at this. And there's to me, there's a very interesting issue about the nature of the soul, the human soul. And again, I see that theologians have grappled with this problem often in a better way than most other people, because from a theological point of view, and it's not only the Christian tradition, but let's just take that tradition. The better soul, or the soul can be in a state of grace or can be closed to grace. It can be open or closed. And I see that's the same with a character, with a mind, with a disposition, with a soul. And that means you either lock in the associations, the information that you have, and you make sure that you only filter any truths that come your way insofar as they must correspond, remember that corresponding, they must correspond to the coherence. I'm messing around a bit, obviously, with that coherence versus correspondence. There's two theories of truth to bring out another point that moves beyond them, I hope. They will only allow that to come in what fits their template, of course, that ideology. But it may not even be ideology. It may just be a character type. You know, I know this. And in fact, I'm thinking of a good friend of mine that I think is very much, unfortunately, like that. You know, just whatever he thinks is right. Because that storehouse, that bank of associations, he's so convinced that suffices, that guides him and orientates him, and so many people are like that. But if you want to know more, to be more, when that's not what you do. You have to be, as if you want to be saved, the theologians say, you have to be open to grace, to be open to that information. Now the question of, yes, but if we're open, then we can never make a decision. Remember earlier I said about provisionality. Provisionality is the recognition of the fact that what you know is what you know, but more things may be revealed to you. And that the truth is not something that you put in your pocket, that you have once and for all. That certain things suffice, your knowledge of them suffice, what you're doing with them suffice, so that you think you can do that. And you may not need to undo that. But having the flexibility and here I'll use another term, integrity, to be willing to dissolve yourself in order to become more truthful to a self that is being made and developed, but better equipped and more able to contribute to others in the world. That requires this openness. And that's the interesting thing. It's a dissolution, it's a diminution, because you recognise the smallness. It's a willingness to change. It's a breaking, in a sense, the bonds of these associations which have become intrinsic to you. But it's an enabling other associations, new information to come through, and with that enables you to grow as a person. That's really what I think growth is as a person. I think it's involved in that. So let me sum up this. I know this has been a wild and rambling talk, but in a way it's because I think truth itself is wild and rambling. I like Gilles Deleuze. I don't like everything about Gilles Deleuze, but, you know, where he talks about the rhizomic nature of truth. And, rhizome is something that, unlike what I've probably said this before, but the arboreal truth is like a tree, and you just divide everything. And that's the Platonic idea that's discussed way back in the origins of philosophy, is the way truth and knowledge are set out by Plato in terms of species and subspecies, or genus and species. So you ask a question, you're looking for an underlying overarching essence of what something is, so you can define it. The arboreal is that. So the one and the many then breaks down in a very specific and logical, and using logic you can patternize it, whereas what Deleuze is talking about is the rambling nature, like spinifex, just roaming along and picking things up in its sway. And I think that's great. I think that's absolutely true. That is what our lives are like. They're not so rigid, they're not so constant, and those lives which seem to be can fall apart through some new piece of information, some new aspect of existence intruding upon it, some feature of existence, some person intruding upon it. So being aware of why truth or that truth, not dispensing with it as, oh, that's just, I'm too good, I have my truth, you have your truth. That's childish. It's not even, what does it even mean? That will answer nothing serious. If you wish to grow, you want to learn more things, and the truth about more things, the truth about the world, the truth about yourself, doing certain things, and there's an infinite number of things you can do. But being conscious of the different aspects means recognizing the moving, and this was, Hegel talked about coherence, the dynamism of reason itself. My problem with the idealist is I think that it is jagged and the contingencies of life intrude upon that to such an extent that it's not simply of its own genesis and development, that it's a constantly rebuilding and devolving. But if we are not serious about wanting to be more questioning, and that is not considering the different aspects of anything that we're discussing when we're thinking about the larger issues of our lives or society in general, then we're not doing justice to truth. Thank you.